Well, it's been a bit of a busy weekend for lots of political commentary and discussion and noise about our Human Rights Act. So this morning we've put out a blog called Don't Mention Mr Raab, and I'm going to take you through some of the key points in this vlog. So obviously I have mentioned Mr Raab straight off, and he is, after all, our Justice Secretary, the government's minister in charge of our justice systems, and that includes the law and policy on our Human Rights Act and all the different legal ways that we can hold the government and public bodies to account, both using the Human Rights Act and using other processes like judicial review. I think it is safe to say that he is not the biggest fan of the Human Rights Act, and that's not really surprising. Essentially, it's about holding power to account, whatever kind of colour or party political persuasion that power is. So when we hear all of the talk about overhauling our Human Rights Act and what really feels very much like a sleight of hand trying to make people think that this is something about Europe, talking about the European Court and lots of other distractions, I and us at BIHR would like to talk about something different. We would like to talk about power and people, and to talk about and we use our deliberately, Human Rights Act, because our Human Rights Act is about people. It is about what we need to live good lives, and it is about the protection from and also the support of the state. So let's talk about power and people and not the state, and let's talk about people who benefit from the Human Rights Act every single day. People like you, like me, like lots of other people that you will interact with in your day-to-day life, the stories that very rarely are told. And I wanted this to be a really short and snappy read when I put the blog together, but as I was writing it, I was really reflecting and thinking that actually this is fundamentally really important stuff and it deserves a few extra minutes of our time. So at its core, the Human Rights Act is a law, and that is about power and people. It is a law that sets out our rights as people living in the UK. It's a fairly modest list of 16 protections, but one which is really fundamental to be able to live an equal and dignified life for each person that is here. And that might be the right to life, to live free from harm, to make decisions about our own lives, our liberty, being able to meet with other people, being able to think what we want. And because it's a really practical law as well about these really kind of everyday issues and not just theoretical niceties, our law recognises that many of the rights that we hold are not absolute, so they can be balanced or limited to ensure that we can all live well with each other, kind of taking into account all of the different inevitable conflicts that will happen, living as humans in society to kind of make it work for all of us. So thinking a bit about kind of power, crucial details about how the law works are rarely and questionably deliberately features in the kind of very simple, repetitive narratives used by those who are determined to change how the law holds them to account. And that's whether we're talking about Mr Raab or his predecessors since the passing of the Human Rights Act in 1998. And really, make no mistake, I've been doing this across all different variations of governments for a number of years, getting into the decades now. And governments of other political colours have also attacked laws that limit their power, and I may have broken the rule about who we don't mention again. Importantly, our Human Rights Act is also about responsibilities. It's about legal duties on those with public power to uphold people's rights, balancing those non-absolute rights appropriately in decisions, in policies, in services, in kind of lots of everyday things. And that means it is about the responsibilities of people like Mr Raab, the Justice Department, or Ash at the local authority housing office, or the primary school that Rosie heads up, or the police service where Kem walks the beat. When these people with public power risk our rights, whether that's deliberately or because of systemic failures, the Human Rights Act means that we can hold them to account. It doesn't always mean we end up in court, as important as that can be, and really courts are actually the last place that we should end up in, because the legal duty means that we can talk, advocate and negotiate for better solutions, just like we do whenever we have an issue with kind of public bodies, with the officials that we bump into every day. If we kind of don't agree with them, if we think something might have gone wrong, we have that conversation. But what the Human Rights Act means is that rather than talking about unfairness, we have the backing of the law to talk about how something might be risking our rights and to ask about how they are meeting their legal duties, their responsibilities to consider and uphold our rights. And of course, if things are urgent or if they can't be resolved, then yes, we can go to court. We have that ability now to bring cases here at home. And we really should be clear that our Human Rights Act means that judges here at home decide those cases. And whilst judges can make important legal rulings on human rights issues, if a law needs to be changed because it's breaching our rights, because there's some kind of issue, then it's for our elected representatives and kind of the House of Lords in Parliament to change the law. And Parliament means all MPs and peers, not simply the government. Judges decide if the government has broken the law, Parliament decides if the law needs to change. That's the way our democracy works, because the government doesn't get to check its own homework, whether that's on human rights or other fundamental issues in our democracy. So, people, us, kind of that's the bit about how the Human Rights Act works out of the way. And I'm always really a bit hesitant about whether to include that when I'm talking or writing about the Human Rights Act, because the short, snappy comms person in me says, no, don't drone on, keep it short, keep it simple. But the person who wants to empower through education says, there are actually so few opportunities for us to learn about how our legal protections actually work. The playing field in these debates feels really skewed. It relies on these slivers of truth and it banks on a lack of confidence to challenge. And ultimately, it is vital that when those with responsibilities to uphold our rights, like the government, are talking about changing the laws that allow us to have that accountability, that we can engage with them from an informed position. So often those with power rely on really simple, provocative narratives with a kind of kernel of truth, but not quite the whole story. They rely on not enough of us kind of actually knowing or feeling confident to kind of make that challenge. And that's a risk we can't take with our fundamental rights. And the information that you'll rarely hear in these discussions, in these debates, is the story of people, everyday people using our Human Rights Act in everyday ways to help them, to help us, to help our loved ones, to help us live a decent life, nothing extravagant, just to be able to live with basic dignity and respect. So if, as Mr Raab suggests, supporting women who've experienced domestic abuse is so important, and it absolutely is, then we should be hearing from women like Jess, who worked with us on the development of one of our Know Your Human Rights tools, who for her learning about the Human Rights Act and how we can use the law every day gave her the confidence to know that it was not okay, that people and systems had failed her and that she could hold them to account. As she says, given her past experiences, she's really struggled to stand up for herself and her rights and hasn't had the confidence. But now that she knows the Human Rights Act means that the law is there for her to have her rights upheld, she feels like she can use her human rights when she wants to challenge a decision or to try and get a better solution. And the same for people like Anna, who are support workers who advocate with and for women like Jess, who are too often failed by public bodies. And what Anna tells us is that it can often appear that human rights kind of don't form any part of the decision-making process when they're made by bodies like social care or the police or those sort of public bodies that we bump into every day. So actually knowing a bit more about how the Human Rights Act works has been invaluable for teams who are supporting those women who have been subjected to abuse to actually kind of take a stronger stance, to develop that confidence and to work on something to kind of get a much more positive outcome. So kind of it isn't just about legal cases, but legal cases are really important. And when legal cases are taken, because of the failings of the police to effectively investigate and stop violence against women, any good lawyer or support organisation or organisation working in this area will tell you that it is the Human Rights Act that makes those kinds of cases possible. So if we think it's important to hold the police and other criminal justice systems to account for violence against women and for addressing it, then we need the Human Rights Act to do that. It can help each of us have a voice to really get that real and meaningful change. Thinking about all of the people that we work with at BIHR, we can think about Kirsten, who is a single parent of an autistic son, who as a child was restrained and secluded, put into rip-proof clothing, think uniform in a locked, bare room in a hospital that is supposed to be caring for him. And for him and for his mum, Kirsten, the Human Rights Act was an incredibly powerful tool to change some of these terrible things happening in this situation. Or for Zila, a social worker, who talks about how social workers use the Human Rights Act every single day to make really life-altering decisions about people's care and support. For them, this is not a tool of bureaucracy. It is actually something that really helps get the right result when difficult decisions need to be made, and it's about all of those everyday issues. But these are the voices of everyday people that get left out when those with power make sweeping statements about changing our protections that hold them to account. And like any other law, the Human Rights Act isn't a magic wand. It doesn't by its existence create a world where everyone has their rights upheld. But what it does do is it gives us people the power to make that happen. If we're working in public bodies, we can be using the law to make better decisions each day that support people's rights. If we're advocating with or for people, we can be more powerful in calling for their legal rights to be upheld rather than simply asking for fairness. And if, as people, we are experiencing issues, we can talk to those in power and not simply ask for compassion or special treatment, but to know that we are human beings entitled to have our legal rights met and that those with power are accountable for that. What we need is a lot more use of the Human Rights Act so that becomes everyone's experience. So rather than analyse Mr Raab's comments and pick them apart with facts and myth busting, which quite frankly is almost too easy, I would much rather talk to you about why our Human Rights Act matters. And it's really simple. Our Human Rights Act matters for mothers like Kirsten, for support workers like Anna, for survivors of abuse like Jas, for social workers like Fazila, for you, for all the people you care about and all the people you don't, everyone. Because our Human Rights Act is about us and our power, and we need to protect and celebrate that. So if you want to join in, go to our website, www.bihr.org.uk, and find out why our Human Rights Act matters and join in the conversation.